Developments of multi-facility economic zones around the country has been going on for about 10 years. However, progress in these sites has been a bit slow. On this week's edition of News In Depth, we look at the projected economic impact of these zones on the Zambian economy. I'm your host, Masauso Kwayaya. Stay tuned. Zambia is one of the countries in the world endowed with abundant natural resources. It is a country of striking valleys and rolling hills. Different parts of the country still possess rare, dense, and untamed bushes, with some hosting different species of wildlife. Beautiful rivers, outstanding lakes, and various breathtaking waterfalls are also a common and adored feature. Wide, virgin fertile land suitable for agriculture is also very abundant. But despite all these natural resources, copper remains the main major export commodity, as well as the main foreign exchange earner. Copper is mined from the earth crust located around Copperbelt and northwestern provinces. However, in the 1970s, the high oil and plummeting copper prices on the international market caused a severe shock and stress on the Zambian economy. This caused successful governments to start devising ways of diversifying the economy from copper dependence. As one of the measures to kickstart the reforms, in 2006, the Levy Patrick Mwanawasa-led government formulated the Vision 2030. The aim of the vision was to make Zambia a prosperous middle-income country by the year 2030. The Vision 2030 was also backed by a National Development Plan. One of the main objectives of the National Development Plan was to create an enabling environment to attract investments from the private sector. To that effect, the Zambia Development Agency, ZDA, was established under an Act of Parliament. The ZDA is a one-stop shop mechanism with the main responsibility of reducing bureaucratic procedures in setting up businesses. The ZDA Act No. 11 of 2006 mandated the agency to establish, administer, control, and regulate multi-facility economic zones in the country.
And what we're basically saying in the general objectives is that we want to sort of stimulate industrial and economic development through the manufacturing sector. Because as you know, in the manufacturing sector, we've had situations where the numerous raw materials, natural and agricultural, are all exported in raw form. So we're trying to sort of get a situation where in the manufacturing sector, these are processed and they are good to go for enhanced value and exported or treated in the domestic market. So essentially, it's a government program aimed at creating an attractive investment platform for investments.
In this vein, multi-facility economic zones are forerunners of export processing zones. These were set up a few years ago to house companies that were required to produce and process goods for export. Being a key player in the country's manufacturing sector, the Zambia Association of Manufacturers, ZAM, has fond memories of what exactly happened to the export processing zones.
What happened was that this concept was developed, I think, around 2001, and they started as export processing zones. So the idea was to create a separate area where you can have companies that was businesses basically to produce for export purposes. And they were supposed to export like 80% of what they produce and then sell 20% in the domestic economy. So it was a way of boosting export of different products, for example, manufactured products in that sense. But there were challenges, especially with the management, because the export promotion zone was like a territory. Everything that leaves has to pass through customs to ensure that 80% is destined for the export market and only 20% is destined for the domestic market. So then they developed another concept of the multi-facility economic zones. And the way the zones are operating is very similar to the way a shopping mall operates. So they provide a land, and then they provide a conducive environment for a company to set up.
Other players in the sector say multi-facility economic zones integrate the concept of free trade zones, export processing zones, and industrial parks. Nonetheless, the key objective of the MFEs is to catalyze industrial and economic development. This is through increased activity in the manufacturing sector for the purpose of enhancing domestic and export-oriented business. Currently, the country has 4 multi-facility economic zones under development. 3 of the 4 already existing zones are in Lusaka province. One of the 3 zones is located about 10 kilometers south of Lusaka Central Business District. It is known as the Lusaka South Multi-Facility Economic Zone. The zone sits on a 2,100 hectares piece of land. The area is paved with a 12.5 kilometers road network. This infrastructure is a result of millions of dollars of investments.
The government has put in $50 million to date, and we'll put in some more. I believe that we have 758 million commitment into this. I see a lot of potential, and the will has to be there. So when the president makes those pronouncements, how are those pronouncements taken by the various stakeholders? So, for example, MFES is a tool that we would like to use to do that. We are looking at ZPA. How can we use that? And if those institutions are operating the way they need to, the sky's the limit. As Zambia, look, everywhere you see is a lot of potential. What is important is to convert that potential. We've been talking about this for years as a nation. What is it that we can do to convert that potential into reality? So MFES is one such institution where we want to see a lot of progress being made, because that begins to make a difference. And if this works, we can open other zones and accelerate what we are trying to do.
When the Lusaka South Multi-Facility Economic Zone was established in 2010, its affairs were sole responsibility of the Zambia Development Agency, ZDA. However, the Lusaka South Zone is now an independent government-owned limited company. The other zone in Lusaka is the Zambia-China Corporation Lusaka East Zone, located about 3 kilometers from the Kenneth Kaunda International Airport. The zone is managed by the Zambia-China Trade Corporation Zone, ZCCZ. The third zone in Lusaka, located in the outskirts of the sprawling Roma area, is known as Roma Park. Roma Park is a mixed development zone, but unlike the other 2 zones in Lusaka that have a strong bias towards industrial establishment, Roma Park has a strong inclination towards real estate and residential developments.
So we have residential and commercial area. With our industrial side of it, we have more of the small scale as compared. I think the one in New Kasama is more of a larger scale so we focus more on small scale businesses. When we've had clients who've been interested in the multi-facility economic zone part of our business, they've been able to speak more with ZDA and get more insight on how exactly they can go about to attract some of the incentives that come with being in the multi-facility economic zone.
The other and only zone, which is by far the most developed, is the Chambishi Multi-Facility Economic Zone, located in the mining town of Chambishi on the Copper Belt. Just like the Lusaka East Zone, the Chambishi Zone is also managed by the Zambia-China Trade Corporation Zone.
With the emphasis that we have at the moment, I think we've got 4 that are active. 6 have been declared so far, 4 are active. And of the 4, only 1 emphasis appears to have now taken off to the point where we are saying we can measure impacts. And if you go to the Chambishi Zone now, you will see the kind of impacts that I'm talking about here.
According to the master plans of the other 3 zones, by now, the zone's quantifiable impact on the Zambian economy could have been noticed. But developments at these zones have been very slow. A number of factors have been attributed to the slow uptake of investments in the zones. Currently, only 2 companies are close to begin operations at the Lusaka South multi-facility zone.
The slow uptake in the zone there, first and foremost, is government. And I've discussed the aspects of infrastructure. And infrastructure costs money. So when you sort of haven't prioritized infrastructure development, you won't get to the level that you want to be. I mean, infrastructure has to be prioritized, and I'm talking about need infrastructure like electricity. We are now just doing the substation up there, which should be completed by the end of the year. It's going to be complemented by the solar project, which again is being handled by the IDC, who are also stationed in the MFES itself. So once we do this, because all the investors that come and have been asking to go into the zone will always say, but there's no electricity. I mean, how am I going to operate? So that has been sort of a discouraging aspect on the part of the investors. So we are basically focusing ourselves. ZESCO is the main player in terms, because they will distribute electricity in the zone. So they have to take a part. But obviously, ZESCO doesn't just come up with the money, and they have to also go through the same pocket that the Lusaka South MFES has to go through. So and that's why at the end of the day, we decided to create a company to run the MFES, which should be able to sort of go and raise money other than depending on the government source. They need to sort of raise the money elsewhere.
One of the prominent factors causing the slow intake of investors is the minimum investment threshold. For an investor to access the government-owned Lusaka South multi-facility economic zone, a minimum of 500,000 United States dollars is required. This is in order for the investing company to enjoy the incentives in the zones, and this has not gone well with some local experts. A local financial analyst has bemoaned the high minimum investment thresholds.
Well, I think it is important to reevaluate. I mean, when you set thresholds, they should not be set in abstract. You want to attract the right kind of people, investors, to come and invest into your zone. And when you look at what has happened this far, it's probably an indication that the threshold is a bit too high and might be difficult to attain. So it is important that government rethinks and relooks at this position to ensure that that place does not become a white horse.
And Lusaka South Multi-Facility Economic Zone Managing Director Fortune Kamusaki says the threshold is fixed. Dr. Kamusaki adds that people complaining about the high price should lobby relevant government agencies for a downward adjustment.
That's a policy decision by the government. At the moment, the threshold is fixed. So if stakeholders feel it's high, they have to lobby the relevant government organs to reduce the threshold. For now, we are implementing what the law says.
And the Zambia Development Agency has indicated that the minimum investment threshold required to invest in the Lusaka South zone is meant to attract a particular class of investors. This is so that they demonstrate the muscle of establishing firms that will have a traceable spillover benefit on the local economy.
That threshold does not mean that if you do not have $500,000, you won't go into the MFES. You can still go into the MFES, except that you will not enjoy the benefits of the MFES in terms of the fiscal incentives. You will be able to do the business and get indirect benefits in terms of, because you're linked to certain big players in the MFES. So you will still be there. So there is a lot of misunderstanding about the threshold in terms of the locals crying foul that no, this is too high and this is only favoring the. It's because we put it at that level so that it's going to attract that level of investment. We will make foregoing what we're giving away as an incentive, in the sense that people will not pay corporate tax for 5 years, for instance. So we give away that, and we expect that the person is going to generate employment for people. So those are the kind of things. So If you don't have the 500, it doesn't mean that you won't go in the M-phase.
But a financial expert insists that having a rigid investment threshold as a condition to do business in the zone will greatly disadvantage local investors. Mr. Hamaundu maintains that a low local investor intake in the zones has an inevitable potential of causing severe shocks in the economy.
If a local investor makes money within the Zambian economy, chances are the money will remain to a great extent within the Zambian economy. For a foreign investor, ultimately, quite a portion of the returns that they'll make within the Zambian economy will go back to, or will be repatriated to their countries of origin. But for a local, the benefits might probably be a bit more. So it is important that the right balance and the right mix of investors is achieved.
However, the board chairperson of the Lusaka South Mount Facility Economic Zone has hinted that the board is willing to adjust anything that is hindering investments in the zone.
There's a master plan, and certain regulations have been put in place, certain plans have been put in place, and how the things should be done. So as the new board, what we would like to do is to look at that and see, are any of those things impeding what needs to be done? And then engaging the relevant authorities and saying, can we do this differently? Because the aim isn't so much about the regulation as in achieving what the M-phase was set up for. That is what we're supposed to do. And so we don't want to be hindered, so to speak, by what has been put in place. If we find that what has been put in place is slowing down the process, it can be changed.
The Zambia Association of Manufacturers, ZAM, has called on ZD and the M-phase Limited to expedite their efforts in making available information regarding the zones. ZAM Acting Chief Executive Officer Lewis Chimfwembe says lack of adequate information on investments conditions to access the zones is hampering progress in the establishments.
There's a lot of information disparity where companies may not really know the requirements that they are supposed to adhere to move into the zones. So there hasn't been adequate sensitization in that regard, and there is need for the people that are managing the zones and the government to scale up efforts towards sensitizing the companies on what the conditions are for one to get into the zones. Then companies have also expressed worry on the sublease. The sublease for a zone is on average 40 years, and when you're looking at the scale of investment that the companies are making to be in the zone, it's quite a very huge investment, and they think the 40-year lease period is very little to incentivize them to set up base in the zones.
Some companies that have already started operating in the zones have also shared their challenges. Zambezi Liquor is a company that specializes in brewing different types of Chinese and local alcohol. The company has set up its factory at the Zambia-China Trade Corporation, Lusaka East Mount Facility Economic Zone. The company says it is currently not able to operate at full capacity due to frequent electricity load shedding.
We consider the problem already. We try to do the precaution to avoid that. For example, we arrange, if we know the time is regular time, when will be cut off, we arrange our production. Our local people can continue when power comes. Our distilled period time is lasted at least 20 days. The trouble for us is we cannot produce regularly.
But the Zambia Development Agency says the challenges that have been brought about as a result of daily power cuts are an opportunity that investors should consider investing in.
The load shedding itself has created a challenge, but it's an opportunity for other investors. But other investors obviously will be attractive to come and invest in alternative sources of energy if you get the policies and the tariffs and everything right. At the moment, there's still a lot of debate about the tariff structures. We have to engage ourselves with ERB. Look at the solar. The solar, you can only put in up to 300 megawatts in the grid. The grid has to be studied in terms of its stability. So all those are aspects that we feel should be streamlined, but as the ZDA, we encourage and we facilitate investments in alternative energies.
Local experts have called for an immediate solution to frequent electricity cuts that are affecting industries. The experts argue that if production at these companies is halved, the revenue base of the country will reduce, a situation which will lead to industrial job losses.
We need to have companies or businesses that are viable, that are active, that are generating revenues for them to contribute towards our revenue basket. In the absence of that, we might resort to the problem of borrowing on the commercial market, which is quite expensive.
So when you're being load shaded for a period of 8 hours, as a small company that cannot afford to switch to alternative power of using generators, then the only option you have to shut down production within that 8 hours. You may tend to cut down on employment, you may tend to reduce the output.
Notwithstanding all these challenges, many Zambians are already benefiting from the companies that have already invested in the multi-facility zones. Currently, over 5,000 direct jobs have been created in all the 4 zones across the country.
There are different periods that's different. At the tops, we have less than almost 50 people. Now our construction job is less. Here today we have 20 people like that. Some is a fixed job. They are by our training. They are very experienced to produce this Chinese one even.
Working for this company has been so exciting as well as more educative because we have had a chance of learning more about production. Some of us did not have experience, but we were trained by the company. And I think it is also contributing in job creation because mostly around here, we don't have many companies employing mostly like general workers or even other positions. But at the moment, I think the company is helping in giving employment to unemployed youths.
We've employed about 1,000 people who are doing construction in different parts of the development. So, we do have people that we sell land to that have also employed other people. So it's been interesting to see how much, people have gotten jobs, be it building, whatever form of construction.
The economic benefits of the zones have also reached far-flung rural areas. Zambian Breweries has set up a malting plant in the Lusaka South Zone. The company gets its barley from farmers across the country.
The malting process is quite simple. We require good quality Zambian barley, which we have, since we have started and established a barley breeding program 9 years ago with local farmers. All the barley which we are going to utilize is from Zambia and will become Zambian malt. And then Zambian beer. So from Zambia, barley from Zambia, processed in Zambia to Zambian malt for Zambian beer.
Another brewery located in the Zambia-China Lusaka East Zone is empowering local farmers.
And Zambia have good quality of sorghum. We use this organic sorghum to produce liquor. That's very good quality now. Chinese people all in Lusaka, they all like that. Now our products now is come to the any shop, Chinese shop, even restaurant. Now we have the plan to supply to the local market.
Aside the 4 existing multi-facility economic zones, government has also declared the establishments of 3 more zones across the country. An iron and steel multi-facility economic zone, which will concentrate on value addition of iron and steel products, will be established in Kafiwe. Another zone which will specialize in mineral value addition will be set up in the mining town of Kalumbila in northwestern province. The establishment of these zones has excited stakeholders. This is because the zones that are going to be put up in rural areas are anticipated to deal with the problem of rural-urban migration.
The zone that we're going to be looking at in the northwestern province in Kalumbila, that will sort of contribute the impact that we're looking at in terms of discouraging rural-urban migration. That will be sorted out because already
in Kalumbila, the environment is made conducive. A zone is put in place. Jobs are created therein. It will minimize the movement of people from rural areas into urbanized Zambia.
However, for a developing country like Zambia, trade liberalization is anticipated to be recorded in ring-fenced regimes such as multi-facility economic zones. Compared to a generalized national liberalized environment, multi-facility economic zones in a country operate as ring-fenced subsets to a non-liberalized environment. Though these zones are expected to generate limited and dynamic benefits to the country, experts say such effects will not necessarily benefit the rest of the country in terms of downwards and forward linkages to the rest of the country's economy. As such, deliberate strategies that will guarantee traceable and quantifiable benefits on the economy should be put in place.
This is where we come to the end of this week's edition of News in Depth, where we were looking at the development of multi-facility economic zones and their projected impact on the Zambian economy. I have been your presenter, Masao Mkwayaya. Join Macpherson Mkuka next week as he looks at the economic impact of adapting to renewable sources of energy. Pleasant viewing. Zambia is in the campaign period, preparing for the August 11 general elections. Political parties are already shaping up the political landscape. The media on the other side are preparing to capture every moment. On this week's edition of News in Depth, we look at how the media is preparing to cover this year's elections. I am your presenter, Masao Mkwayaya. Join me as we zero in on what stakeholders need to do to make sure violence against the media is avoided. Stay tuned. Zambia has an enviable record of 25 years of peaceful multi-party democratic elections. And within weeks, the country goes to the polls again to elect representatives in government. The big day is August 11, 2016. Preparations have already started, pioneered by the Electoral Commission of Zambia. Among the critical stakeholders in the electoral process is the media. The media, as always, is ready to capture every moment of the political happenings ahead of the elections. Basically, the media is undoubtedly recognized as the cornerstone of democracy. The fraternity plays an important role in influencing political discourse during elections. The media has been there throughout, capturing national deciding moments where different presidents have passed on power from one to the other peacefully. However, it is important to note that a free and fair election is not only about the freedom to vote and the knowledge of the electoral rules. It is also about a participatory process, one where the media is able to engage all electoral stakeholders freely. According to a media researcher at the University of Zambia, it is difficult to talk about democracy in the absence of a free media. Therefore, democracy cannot flourish without the free participation of the media.
Political players must respect our profession. I feel they must give us the diligent views and platforms that and environment that should help us to perform our duties in a proper manner. We have seen in the past situations where political players, opposition, ruling, independent, coming to media professionals, attacking them through verbal attacks, physical attacks. I feel this is very unfair when it comes to the media professionals, because they play a huge role when it comes to the maintenance of democracy in this country. And without media professionals, without the media itself, the democracy in this beautiful Zambia would not sustain. So I feel it's very important that the media professionals are given a platform to perform their duties in an environment that helps us to be creative, that helps us to do our work in a good manner and a good environment and safe environment.
And media consultant Kelly Kaunda says the atmosphere in Zambia is quite favorable for the media to conduct their duties effectively.
First, by and large, the legal and policy environment for the execution of duties as a journalist does exist. Yes, there are pieces of legislation that are still in existence that we need to deal with, but those would not be able to impede any journalist from undertaking their duties as journalists, especially during a critical period like this one during elections.
Alive to the important role that the media plays in the democratic process, the public service broadcaster, ZMBC, is positioning itself equal to the task of informing and educating the masses.
His firm is highly advanced.
To this effect, ZMBC is already preparing to cover this year's elections from all corners of the country.
We do have a very competent human capital in as far as reporters and producers are concerned. And these are trained reporters and producers from reputable tertiary institutions around the country and outside the country. And they are competent to handle these elections. We have handled elections before. And in terms of equipment, we may not have adequate equipment. But of course, we do have collaborative efforts or work. We do work in hand with such organizations as the Zambia News and Information Services, ZANIS, and also the National News and Information Service, NAIS. So through our collaborative efforts with these institutions, we'll be able to cover the elections.
Journalists from the private media as well are preparing for the general elections. They also describe election coverage as one of the most challenging tour of duty. At the same time, elections come with a lot of challenges bordering on the safety of journalists. Safety challenges range from physical harassment to accusations of news coverage bias.
Well, basically, there are a lot of challenges that journalists face in this country as regards covering elections. Firstly, we're going to start with media harassment and political cadres thinking some journalists belong to a certain political party or they write in favor of a certain political party. And usually you get to find that some political cadres begin to harass you if they think you are against their political party. And I think that is one of the major challenges that the media faces as regards covering elections in this country. I think there's need for political parties to sit down with their cadres or however they can do it, but just to make their cadres realize that the media is doing their job objectively.
In terms of finances, you know that not being a public media, private media organizations tend to have to find their way in terms of funding, hence the thought from most members of the public to say that most private media institutions are actually inclined to certain political parties, because at the end of the day, all we want is a better Zambia.
However, alive to this fact, the Independent Broadcasting Authority, IBA, is equal to the task of regulating the broadcast media in the country. This is especially around this time. The IBA has since cautioned media houses to be extremely careful and professional in the execution of their duties. The authority says by being professional, the media will ensure that they favorably contribute to the holding of free and fair elections.
There is a great temptation that, sometimes in carrying out their duties, journalists might actually be responsible for certain outcomes that are not expected. For example, because of their coverage, they might actually contribute to violence or indeed even apathy in the way they conduct their reports. So broadcasting stations, radio and television stations are expected to be extremely careful and professional during this period so that they contribute to the holding of the free and fair elections in this country.
But the Media Institute of Southern Africa, MISA Zambia, has observed that the media has become polarized. This is coupled with media practitioners becoming endangered species during elections. MISA Zambia chairperson Helen Mwale says media personnel are very prone to political violence during this period.
I think we all know that when it is this period, media personnel become endangered species, and most of them work out of fear because they don't know what happens to them by the close of the day.
And for ZNBC Corporate Affairs Manager Masujo Ndilovu, the harassing of journalists is greatly unfair. Mr. Ndilovu says it is utterly unfair for some political stakeholders to always be thinking of harassing and mistreating journalists during their line of duty. He describes journalism as a noble profession. As such, stakeholders should exercise maximum respect toward journalists as they do their work.
As a corporation, we are very strong on this. Harassment of any sort to our journalists, not only the ZNBC journalists, but to journalists from other institutions, is a very big offense. And because of that, we have also tried so hard to make sure that our journalists go through the necessary mentorship programs. And this is where we do have strong links with the BBC media action. This is as a way of equipping our journalists so that we can know how to go about in our coverage of news. I think what is key is for us to provide a balanced bulletin. And for us to do that, our journalists are key in gathering information where you also have the right to reply. A situation where you get information from one source who is accusing this other person, and you also get the other side of the story so that the story is balanced. So in doing all that, our appeal is to the political parties out there, if they can leave our journalists alone so that they can be able to work on their own independently.
Prime TV proprietor Gerald Shower is since urging political party members to treat journalists with respect because they are professional people.
Sometimes when our crew go in the field, there are times when sometimes people, they'll think, no, this station is with this grouping. So sometimes our reporters are attacked. Sometimes we've lost equipment, cameras, they're attacked because we are perceived to be with this party, which is not true. We cannot do that. I mean, we are adhering to the ethics and the guidelines from IBA, and we follow that, and we remain professional. So we have no time for us to belong to certain groupings. We cannot do that, or any political party.
Mr. Zambia chairperson Helen Mwale also says she is confident that the media will be protected. This is because the safety of journalists has been assured from the highest level in the land.
I think we have words of hope and encouragement from the Republican President, Mr. Edgar Lungu, who recently said during his press conference that the media under his leadership is protected. So we have every hope that police officers, the security personnel, wherever they may be, including political party cadres themselves, will refrain from attacking media personnel.
President Edgar Lungu is on record of assuring media personnel of utmost protection during this year's election period. During his press conference held at State House a few weeks ago, President Edgar Lungu also assured journalists that their equipment will be protected. The president, however, cautioned the media to exercise maturity and show respect to other stakeholders such as the police.
Media practitioners, please be assured that PF will respect you. The PF government will protect you. You know, and they will not abuse you in any way at all. The police also will be told, and I'm telling them now, to protect the media. Sometimes, obviously, they push you around as you try to cover the president, but that's their job, to protect the president. They're also working. But you see, you're also working, so you find yourself with a position of advantage to get a good show, to get a good story. You're all competing, you're working. But in much more seriously, I think count on PF as a partner in the execution of your work. It's a professional calling, and we love you. And we can't do much without you. You are able. I'm talking to you here now, but through you, I'm able to reach out the whole country. And if I begin saying, get out of here, then what am I doing?
Police, on the other hand, have hinted that their officers have and are undergoing intensive training on how to handle different stakeholders in the electoral process. Police Assistant Public Relations Officer Esther Katongo says officers have received requisite training which will enable them to police this year's elections and campaigns professionally.
Officers, their role is to see to it that all the electoral stakeholders, or should I say all the players in the electoral process, have their rights safeguarded. They are protected during the whole process of the forthcoming elections, which begins from campaigns, should I say from nomination, filing in of nominations, throughout the campaign until the voting itself. So I believe the media are also part of the electoral stakeholders, because they also play a very critical role to inform the public about what is happening.
However, Kelly Kaunda, a media consultant, feels journalists should exercise maximum caution of their own safety. This is before they think of someone else to come to their aid to protect them.
While politicians and other civil society leaders and church leaders speak to the rest of the country, talking about the importance of restraining themselves, journalists should know that the environment may not always be perfect. And for that reason, each journalist and each media house must be able to take precautionary measures. When you are in a position where you sense that there's danger, find ways and means protecting yourself. I do not think that other people will always be looking out for your safety. The primary responsibility for one's safety belongs to that particular individual.
And the police command somewhat share the same sentiments. Police have further urged journalists to make sure that they always put on field vests clearly labeled press. According to the police, this is for identification in case of any trouble.
In instances of violence, you do cover such events. You don't run away as the media. So the best thing to do is also to have, I don't know whether you call them waistcoats, those which are written press, so that even in an instance where an officer will not have chance to start asking for your press pass, they will just be able to see that, oh, this one is someone coming from the media fraternity. So that also should be done by the media, so that we assist one another in identifying each other as we do the policing, and also as you do the covering of the elections.
In recent years, the definition of media has become broader, encompassing online journalism and social media. Citizen journalism is widely gaining traction, including in countries where traditional media is either controlled or strictly regulated. Inherent to this task is the entitlement of parties and candidates to use social media as a platform for interaction with the public. Mwebantu, the largest online media publication in Zambia, with over 500,000 followers, says online media is providing a very affordable opportunity for political stakeholders to intimately interact with people online.
I think social media will have a big role to play
as it's the only medium in the country that gives you direct access to an individual person. You know, we see billboards going up, we see people on TV running campaigns, on movie TVs at NBC. But the reality is, the difference with social media is it allows you to interact directly with your audience. And having that direct interaction with your followers obviously opens up different opportunities for candidates to explore and understand what the social opinion is out there.
However, social media in Zambia has been a ground of a lot of journalistic indiscipline. Some people running social media sites are renowned for promoting hate speech and publishing propaganda news. Mwebantu Corporate Affairs Manager Emma Harvey says social media site administrators should begin to exercise respect for all people they interact with. She says stakeholders should take interest in educating the social media community on how to weigh credible news from propaganda news that is rampant on social media.
I think a lot of your question pivots around a central problem that media all over the world has, which is basically the level of education of the people who are reading this media. And I'm not talking about general education, I'm talking about specific education on how to differentiate between propaganda and fact. So I think it's possibly even a challenge that we can look to in the future for the future government, whoever they may be. It will be about making sure that there is a new generation of people, who, especially youth media is a huge thing that's developing all over the world. And there needs to be a very serious look into educating the masses on how to make those rational and critical decisions about, including choosing their media house, but also being able just to look through an article or watch something on TV or hear something on the radio, and being able to separate whatever values they may have with the facts.
Meanwhile, the IBA has cautioned political stakeholders who may face challenges or disagree with some media houses to follow complaint procedure that have been put in place. The authority has since warned that it will not tolerate anyone who will take issues in their own hands by harassing or abusing journalists in any manner.
As an authority, we discourage as much as possible people to take the law into their own hands, to express or vent their anger on media, personnel by breaking their cameras and things like that, or storming their studios. We don't allow that. The law provides for this process that is very civil. Those are, uncivil ways of addressing your complaints against the media house. So there is a proper and, a way in which to do that. And we want members of the general public, it could be a political institution, it could be a group or whatever it is. If you have a complaint, please put it in writing to the media house. If they don't address it, then write to the authority. That is just for broadcasting stations, I must say.
A prime concern of media coverage of elections is the right of voters to full and accurate information. This is together with the people's rights to participate in debates and dialogues on polity matters with politicians. And some members of the public spoken to in Osaka have ideas on how the media should cover the campaigns and elections.
Mr. Chimambo, how do you think the media should cover this year's elections and the campaigns?
Ask the people what issues need to be addressed, and then the politicians should address those issues. They shouldn't be insulting each other. We don't want that. So it's the issues. What are they going to do? What are the issues that Zambians think should be addressed? And then you ask the Zambians, they tell the politicians what issues need to be discussed, and then each of those politicians should then address.
How do you think the media helps safeguard democracy in the country?
Exactly by allowing the issues, the voices of the vulnerable and to come up, to be heard by the politicians, not the politicians setting the agenda, but the agenda being set by the ordinary people in Bauleni, in Chawama, in Shangombo, and the rest of the country. Those are the people that should set the agenda. Politicians are the servants who should then address those issues. That's how democracy will be set, bottom up.
The tragedy that we have is that we lack information as members of the public from the media.
Well, I feel that the media should be very professional.
They should be balanced in terms of their coverage and be very objective. As they become objective in their coverage, they will help people make independent, decisions on whom to vote for. So they should be balanced in their coverage.
And how do you think the media is important in safeguarding democracy in the country?
It's very important because, as people listen to news, they're able to see what is going on the ground, and they make informed decisions based on what is on the ground and not what someone is purporting to have done or not have been done.
However, for the media to effectively carry out their duties, a conducive, peaceful atmosphere should be created for them. It has always been said that freedom of any nature comes with responsibility. As such, all political stakeholders wishing to enjoy their various freedoms should do so with utmost caution.
His firm is highly advanced.
Thank you so much for being part of this week's edition of News In Depth, where we were discussing proposals from stakeholders on what they think should be done to avoid violence against the media as they prepare to cover this year's campaigns and elections respectively. I have been your presenter, Masao Somkwayaya. Pleasant viewing.